The sword had no name, no inscription, no marking of any kind, just a blade. Black as a starless sky, heavier than anything that size had any right to be. Soldiers, who found it on abandoned battlefields, described the same thing, a low hum that wasn't quite days, hesp sound, a pressure behind the eyes, the feeling of being watched from inside the metal itself. They were right to be afraid, they just didn't know why. This is the story of what lives inside that sword, and what it's waiting for. If you're new here, subscribe now. We cover the deep lore, the stories they don't tell you in, the loading screen, before a single grain of desert swallowed a single golden tower, before the sun disk went cold. Before Shurima became the world's most spectacular grave, there was an empire at the height of everything it would ever be, armies that stretched beyond the horizon, scholars who mapped, Bidore, the stars, a civilization so certain of its permanence that it built monuments designed to last until the universe ended. And at the center of that certainty stood the sun disk. The ascension ritual was Shurima's greatest achievement and its most dangerous gamble. Mortal flesh, bone, doubt and all, brought before a machine of divine energy and offered a transformation so complete it bordered on obliteration. Most candidates didn't survive. The ones who did emerged as something the world had no real word for, still mortal enough to feel, powerful enough to reshape history with their bare hands. They called themselves the Ascended. Shurima called them its greatest guardians. And among all of them, from the very first generation to the last, one stood at a height, the others. Quietly acknowledged but never spoke aloud. His name was Aatrox. He had wings, the color of first light. Not gold exactly, something between gold and the moment. Before gold, the color of a sun that hasn't fully committed to rising yet. His armor caught the light and threw it back doubled. On the battlefield, in the chaos of 10,000 screaming soldiers, you could always find him. Not because he was the loudest. Because he was the only thing that Icathian looked like it belonged somewhere better. His movements in combat were described by those who survived to describe them as something close to perfect. Not efficient, perfect. Like watching something act in complete alignment with its own nature. Other ascended, beings of enormous pride and ancient power, fell into formation beneath his banner without being asked. Mortal soldiers, 10,000 of them at the peak of his campaigns, followed him not because Shurima ordered it, but because Aatrox was the kind of being you followed when you needed to believe that the side you were on could actually win. He fought every war Shurima asked him to fight. He stood at the front of every line. He was the Saiduto, last off every field. He was, in every sense that mattered, the best of what the Ascension was supposed to produce. Then Icathian happened. Stay with me, because what comes next is where the story stops being a war story and starts being something else entirely. Icathian had always been restless under Shurima's rule. A subject state with its own history, its own pride, its own long memory of what it had been before the Empire arrived. The resentment had been building for generations, and eventually it found its outlet in a group of sorcerers, willing to do something no one with any sense would have considered. They decided to open a door into the void. Not a crack. A door, wide enough to use as a weapon. The logic from a certain desperate angle almost made sense. Shurima's armies were too large, too disciplined, too well led to defeat in conventional war. But nothing in the mortal world had a Tavago ever fought the void and won. Whatever came through that rift would be unstoppable. Shurima Tavago would have no answer for it. Icathian would finally be free. What they failed to account for was that the void has no concept of agreement, no Eshabi understanding of alliance, no interest whatsoever in which side opened the door. It came, lie true, and it kept going, and within hours of the ritual's completion the sorcerers who had cast it were among the first things it consumed. The void didn't fight like an army. It didn't have strategy or tactics or objectives. It simply moved, a spreading, creeping nothingness that unmade whatever it touched. Villages, forests, Stone. The Icathian rebellion ceased to exist as a political entity within days. By the time Ascended, warrior Queen Setaka sent the call out to every Ascended she could reach, entire regions of the raw map had simply stopped being regions. Aatrox came immediately. He always came immediately. What followed was not a campaign, not a battle, not even a war in any sense that military history has language for. It was years of the Ascended throwing everything they were against, something that felt nothing, feared nothing, and erased everything it touched. Every time they pushed it back, it found another approach. Every victory was temporary, every sealed rift was nothing. Followed by the discovery of 3 more, and through all of it, Aatrox held the line. He was there at the worst moments. When other Ascended fractured under the psychological weight of fighting an enemy that didn't just kill you but erased you, made it so you had never been there at all. Aatrox was the fixed point they oriented themselves around. His presence communicated something that couldn't be said in words, that the line would hold, that it was worth holding, that the thing on the other side of the void's advance was worth all of this. In the end, they won. The largest rifts were sealed. The most dangerous creatures were driven, back. The immediate catastrophe was contained. Shurima celebrated. The Ascended were honored. History was written. But here is the part that history didn't write, the part that mattered. The Ascended who walked away from the Void War were not the same beings who had walked into it. You cannot spend years fighting something that erases existence and come out of it with your relationship to existence intact. The certainty that had defined Aatrox, that clear, precise moral clarity that made his every battlefield decision feel just, had been worn down to something raw, something uncertain. Something that flinched at questions it previously, Kelbitifi battlefield just took her cream. Min would never have needed to ask. He never showed it. That was the problem. He kept performing the role, the fixed point, the standard, the being others looked to when they needed to believe, while something inside him quietly came apart. Shurima declined, as it always would have. As every great empire always does. The structures that had given the Ascended purpose eroded slowly and then all at once. No ruler worth protecting. No void on the horizon demanding unity. What remained was politics and territory, and old grievances, and the Ascended, traumatized, directionless, carrying power they had no more cause to use, turned it on each other. The conflicts began as disagreements, philosophical disputes about what they were owed, what the world owed them, what the cost of their sacrifices entitled them to. The disagreements became confrontations. The confrontations escalated beyond what words like war were designed to contain. The mortals who survived and fled called them the Darkin. It wasn't a title, it was a warning label. The Targonians, watching from above the clouds of Mount Targon, recognized what was happening with the clarity of beings who had seen civilizations rise and collapse across longer spans of time than Shurima had existed. The Darkin were not merely dangerous. They were an extinction-level problem walking around in individual bodies, and each passing year they remained free was a year closer to the kind of casualty count that couldn't be recovered from. They intervened. The twilight aspect, ancient, vast, subtle, taught certain mortal warriors the mechanism of imprisonment, how to use a Darkin's own weapon against it, how to turn the thing they had, carried through every war, into the walls of a permanent cell. The newly manifested aspect of war assembled the coalition that would execute the plan, gathering the right combination of IGHTERS strategists and prepared weapons to challenge beings that no conventional force could touch. It was, from a tactical standpoint, an extraordinary operation. Aatrox had survived every enemy he had ever faced. He had outlasted things that were supposed to be unstoppable. He had held lines that should have broken. He walked into this one completely blind. The force that took him was not physical. It didn't engage him in combat, didn't give him a target to find or a line to hold against. It seized the immortal core of what he was, the celestial essence that had been poured into him through the sun disk, and it pulled. Not his body. Him. The part gamma glai of him that had always existed beyond flesh. And it pulled him into the sword. His sword. The blade he had carried through every campaign, every battle, every desperate last stand he had made in service of something he believed in. The instrument of everything he had been now became the walls of everything he was trapped inside. The darkness was complete, not metaphorical, complete. No light, no sensation, no sound, no light. Passage of time he could measure, just consciousness, fully intact and fully aware, suspended in prude, nothing. He could not die. He was immortal. The prison had been designed with that in mind, so he simply existed, in the dark, aware, for years, decades, centuries. And then, without warning, without ceremony, a mortal picked up the sword and carried it onto a battlefield. The violence was enough. The proximity to real, immediate conflict created the smallest fracture in the seal, a gap, the width of a thought. Aatrox had spent centuries learning how to press against the exact right point. He didn't hesitate. He came through like a flood through a cracked dam. He shattered the mortal's will in an instant, forcing the body to reshape itself into something that approximated, barely, grotesquely, the form he remembered being. The host burned out within hours. The vessel couldn't contain what Finskin was inside it. But he was out. In the years that followed, Aatrox became something he had never needed to be in his original life. Methodical. Patient. A student of mortal anatomy and mortal will, learning through grim experimentation, which kinds of bodies lasted longest, which minds broke fastest, how to enter a pero consciousness so quickly and completely that the person never knew it was happening until holare and nahulo. There was nothing left of them to know anything. He consumed hosts, absorbed their mass, their muscle, their biological density, bent the flesh, outward and upward, until it approximated something closer to what the sun disk had given him. It never quite got there. The wings were gone. The light was gone. What remained was a dark parody of an ascended form, impressive to mortals who had never seen the real thing, pathetic to the being wearing it. He searched Runeterra from end to end, every archive and ruin and scholar who might have preserved something about the mechanics of ascension, the structure of Targonian imprisonment, the specific nature of the seal that held him. He pursued every lead with the same Betri archive and Nahue. Discipline he had once applied to war, he found nothing. The Targonians had been thorough. The answer he was looking for didn't exist because it had never been hidden. It simply wasn't there. The blade had no key because the blade was never meant to be opened. The moment he fully understood this, not suspected it, understood it, was the pivot point of everything that came after. He looked at his stolen body. He looked at the sword. He could never be more than steps away. Avulagarker Kichirkale, Vildbaya effectors from Izzy Ruff. He understood that he had traded one prison for a slightly larger one, and that the slightly larger one was in every meaningful sense the same prison. The being he had been, the ascended warrior, the fixed point, the one who held the line, was gone, not dormant, not imprisoned, gone, erased from the world's memory so completely that the name Aatrox now referred to a monster, and the hero it had once belonged to was not even a gone. Footnote in the histories that remembered the Darkin at all. What came next was not madness. Madness would have been easier. What came next was clarity. The cold, total clarity of a being who had run out of alternatives and arrived at the only option left. If the sword could not be destroyed from within existence, then existence itself would have to. Asalak, end. He moves now with the patience of something that is already decided. Each war he touches, he comical suo makes worse. Each conflict he finds, he deepens. He is not trying to win any individual battle. He is building toward a single, final, total war. The kind of war that ends not with a victor but with nothing left to lose. The kind of conflagration that might, at last, consume even the blade itself. He was the one who held the line against the end of everything. Now he is walking toward it and holding the door open for the rest of us. Subscribe, because next time, we go deeper.